Alright guys, today I'm going to be doing my 2-year review on the PlayStation 5. It's hard to believe that it's already been 2 years since Sony launched their next generation console, but here we are. November 12th, 2022 is in fact the 2-year anniversary. So I'm going to be talking about my time with the PlayStation 5 over the past 2 years and essentially let you know whether or not it lives up to the hype 2 years later. Does it still feel worth it? What are some areas that have improved? What are some areas that need improvement? And by the end of it, I just want you to kind of get a sense of where I'm at with the PlayStation 5 2 years later. And, maybe if you're somebody who hasn't yet invested into a PlayStation 5 and hasn't upgraded, this should maybe help you kind of get a better sense of what to expect if you're going to be buying in at this point. So before we dive into it, do me a favor, make sure you hit that like button to help the video out and show it your support. It really helps the videos more than you know. And if you are new here to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button as well. So the first thing I'm going to discuss is the thing that was most noticeable to me when I plugged in my PlayStation 5 and played it for the first couple of days. And anybody who moved from the PS4 Pro or even the PS4 to the PS5, or who was planning to do so in the coming months or years, will also notice this immediately. The PlayStation 5 is a completely silent console. At least it has been for me over the past 2 years. Anybody who's played extensively on the PS4, PS4 Pro knows just how loud that console can get, and man, does it get obnoxious. It gets to a point where people are probably putting on headphones or blasting their TV or soundbar just to kind of drown out the sound, and it does sound like a jet engine when you're playing very graphically intense games on the PS4. And so obviously this was a big deal with Sony, with the PS5, to make sure that this console would be completely silent. And so this was something that I talked all about at launch, and everybody was happy to hear this. And I'm really happy to report that 2 years after launch of using my PS5 regularly, I mean, I use this console every day. I have been using it every day for the past 2 years. It's still completely silent. Now, there's one very important thing I do have to acknowledge with this, is I do clean my console out on a somewhat regular basis. If you take the covers off of the side of the PS5, there is a little vent or a dust catcher, and that's where most of the dust accumulates. And so I clean that out. And I don't go crazy with it, but I feel as though it's important to acknowledge that, Sony made it a lot easier to kind of maintain the PS5 compared to the PS4. It's a lot easier to clean out, a lot easier to dust. And so as long as you're kind of just taking basic care of it, you don't have to do it like every month or anything like that, but maybe like every 6 months or so, just give it a little clean out. And that's what I've been doing. And the PS5 is still completely silent. It doesn't make any sound whatsoever. So I just kind of wanted to give you an update on that. And so, come the 3-year mark, we'll see if that still remains to be true. But the next thing I want to talk about is the DualSense. Anybody who upgraded to the PS5 knows that the DualSense is a major change from the DualShock 4. And I kind of just wanted to acknowledge that it's still a standout feature of the PS5. I think there was some concern around the launch of the PS5, and even with the first year of it being out, that it was just going to be maybe something that was kind of a gimmick with the haptic feedback and the adaptive triggers, and developers were going to kind of leave it behind and not continue to take advantage of it and utilize it properly as the years went on. Well, 2 years into the PS5, I can tell you that this is something that developers continue to support very heavily. Now, it's not every single game, and every development team takes advantage of it differently. Some utilize it better than others, but all in all, it's really been something that, I mean, at the time it was talked about like it was a game changer, and it still is, right? Even playing right now God of War Ragnarok. I mean, this is the first game I'm playing where Santa Monica Studio is taking full advantage of it, and obviously that's a first party studio that's going to do that. But when it comes to major third-party titles as well, almost all major third-party titles, at least the AAA ones, take advantage of the DualSense to some extent. And so, I feel like this is really something that is worth highlighting and letting people know that if you were afraid that after 2 years or so, the DualSense was just going to be viewed as a gimmick and something that really was only going to be supported at launch and then completely forgotten about and become an afterthought, that's absolutely not what happened. And it seems like it's here to stay, and developers will continue to take advantage of it. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is Sony doing a pretty good job, I would say, continuing to update this console with key features that were missing at launch. When we talked about the PS5, we talked about how it was missing things such as 1440p support and VRR. And even with the first year of the console, Sony still was very slow to kind of get to these things. But with the second year of the console, things have seemingly turned around. Sony has pretty much added all of the major key features that people were hoping would be there at launch, or were hoping would be there within the first year, and unfortunately weren't. Sony has now rectified that. And so this is an area where I think Sony continues to listen to the feedback. And that's the important thing I want to highlight here, is even though it took a little bit longer than it should have, they did listen and they did eventually incorporate these features. And so now going forward, it's just a matter of continuing to listen to the community, to listen to the user base, and to take that feedback in and hopefully continue to add more features that people are asking for. But continuing to talk about some of the PS5's features, there were some new features that were there at the launch of the PS5, specifically thinking about activity cards and the built-in help tools, where basically what Sony was trying to do is make it so that rather than, pick up your phone and go on YouTube or go on a website to kind of help you out if you're stuck in a certain part of a game or if you're searching for collectibles, they tried to encourage developers to add this to their games, and you can do it right from the console itself. And I will tell you that at the launch of the PS5, and maybe within the first 6 months of it being out, this did seem like a pretty cool feature, and it was one I used a handful of times. But to be completely honest, I have not been taking advantage of these features at all. And honestly, to me, it just feels like they kind of fell off. It just felt like something that was a good idea and maybe something that could have worked, but it just wasn't executed properly. And at the end of the day, what I would end up doing, and I think what most people end up doing, is I would just pick up my phone if I'm stuck in an area of a game, or if I'm looking for collectibles, and I just go on YouTube or go on a website. And at this point in time, I really just don't use the activity cards. I don't use the built-in help features, and I think they're, again, good ideas, but this is definitely an area with the PS5 where, 2 years in, I think it's safe to say that this was something that Sony attempted to kind of make it seem more next gen, or, a newer experience, but I don't think it really landed. However, I do want to point out, mentioning the firmware updates, that the most recent update that Sony put out for the PS5 definitely cleaned up the UI, specifically the activity cards. They're much more organized now, a lot easier to kind of navigate, and they also cleaned up the trophies as well. They made some big improvements to the trophies, major improvement compared to what they looked like at launch. So I just wanted to kind of add that in here as well. Moving on from that, and this is, I think, the biggest thing that people are probably going to want to know about: the games. How has Sony been doing when it comes to the games? Well, in my opinion, Sony has been doing a fantastic job continuing to support the PS5 with great games. However, they have been lacking in one key area, in my opinion, and that is PS5 only exclusives that attempt to really take advantage of the console. That's not to say that any games we've received so far that are cross-gen don't take advantage of the PS5. Of course they do. You're getting higher resolutions, higher frame rates, you're getting the added DualSense features, 3D audio, faster load times. So I don't want to make it sound like if you're somebody who wants to upgrade to this console, and you pick up, again, a game like God of War Ragnarok and you're playing the PS5 version, I don't want to make it sound like you're not getting any improvements or any new features that, just aren't worth it. I don't feel that way at all. Truthfully, I feel like the PS5 has done a phenomenal job. Even though there are many cross-gen titles, I could not see myself going back to the PS4 Pro or the PS4. I've gotten too accustomed to having games offer the 60 frames per second option. I've gotten too accustomed to having higher, crisper resolutions. I've gotten too accustomed to the DualSense, all the things I just mentioned. But I will say that I'm hoping what changes going into 2023 and beyond is we start to see more and more Sony studios specifically, but also third parties, shift away from the PS4 and start to really kind of tap into these specifications and the power of the PS5 and really try to do something significant with it. We have seen that to some extent. I mean, a game like Returnal was PS5 only. They claim that some of the things they were doing with the particle effects just wouldn't have been possible on PS4, so that's cool, obviously. But the big standout is Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, where Insomniac made it clear that this game was built around the PS5 and designed around it, and you can kind of see that, I think, if you play it. But since then, we've been getting like more cross-gen games like Horizon Forbidden West and Ragnarok, and again, it's not a big problem, but it's something that I think going forward, I think I speak for almost all PlayStation fans at this point, going into 2023, we hope to see Sony kind of really start to focus more on PS5 only titles and maybe start to leave the PS4 behind and leave cross-gen behind. So that's where we are with the games right now, but make no mistake, if you are, thinking of picking up a PS5 for the games, which obviously that's why you would pick up a PS5, you're definitely in for a treat, for sure. There's a lot on offer, and Sony has just been very consistent with their releases, and the quality is still there. Next up, I want to talk about customization, specifically like, what can you do to your PS5? Is Sony offering anything to kind of, make it your own? And yes, Sony has done certainly a lot more in 2022 compared to 2021. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think they really did anything in 2021. So they've released new covers in different colors. This is something that a lot of people were asking for, and I believe it was back, maybe it was January of this year, but it was really early in 2022. They announced all the different colors, and they actually also released matching DualSenses for it as well. They also recently released a camo pattern that you can get. You can get not only the covers and the DualSense, but the Pulse headset as well. And so this is an area where Sony has been offering more in terms of customization. I think some people are a little bit disappointed that, we're 2 years into this console's life cycle and there has been no like game-specific covers or consoles or anything like that. I think at the very least, some players were hoping that Sony was going to maybe come out with a limited edition PS5 cover for Horizon Forbidden West or God of War Ragnarok, but we haven't seen anything like that yet. They still are just sticking with the solid colors and the occasional, I guess, camo pattern. And so we'll see if they continue to kind of add more going forward, but that's where we're at. So if you're somebody who cares a lot about that, yeah, it's there for you. Now, another feature I want to talk about, well, actually two core features with the PS5 that I want to talk about. 3D audio. This was something that was marketed pretty heavily alongside the launch of the PS5. And to me, 3D audio is one of these features where it's not being utilized as much, not nearly as much as something like what we see with the DualSense. But the good news is when it is taken advantage of and when it is utilized, it's done very, very well. And if you are wearing a headset that is capable of, supporting 3D audio, then it definitely enhances the game. It enhances all aspects of the game. But again, it's one of these features where it's not being taken advantage of nearly as much as other features of the PS5. So we'll have to kind of wait and see if 3D audio ends up like kind of dying out, or if it gets picked up more going forward and taken advantage of more, or if it just kind of stays where it is right now, where it's going to be kind of like a 50-50 thing where some games support it and other games don't. So that's where we stand with 3D audio. We're going to talk about the PlayStation 5's SSD now. This was obviously a big focus for Sony with the marketing of the PS5. And I will say that the PS5's SSD has lived up to the hype in terms of what it can do for load times. I mean, there have been multiple games where there are pretty much no loading screens, or at most maybe it's 1-2 seconds, and that has definitely been a game changer this generation. It continues to be a game changer. Anybody who's been playing on the PS4, PS4 Pro, you know just how long some of these load times can be. That's just not a thing on the PS5. So that is still a standout feature to me, even 2 years later. Now, when it comes to the big changes that we could see thanks to the SSD and the overall speed of the PS5, for example, Mark Cerny, when he talked about the development of the PS5, he alluded to potential major fundamental changes in core game design. That's not something we've really seen yet. Again, aside from maybe a standout like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, we're not quite there yet. So when it comes to the PS5's SSD, it's mainly for the instant load times. And continuing to talk about the SSD, I do want to speak on the fact that Sony, they made the decision when they talked about the PS5 leading up to its launch that they were not going to have a proprietary SSD for users to buy, similar to what Microsoft did with the Xbox Series X. Instead, they said that they're going to allow users to buy their own SSDs and choose which one they want to put in the console. And we had to wait a little bit for this. It took a little bit of time, but this proved to absolutely be the right call on Sony's part. And this is especially being felt now during the PS5 second year, because the prices of these SSDs are beginning to go down. And I think pretty much everybody can agree that they just like having the option. I mean, you do have to go a little bit out of your way to install the SSD. And if you look up the process, it's really very simple, very easy. But as time has went on, more and more people are in agreement that this was the best way Sony could have handled it. So having all those options at your disposal as a means to upgrade your storage, I think people are finding that it's actually been great. And honestly, if you look at the way Microsoft handled it with the proprietary SSD, it's not really going so well for them. It seems like the price of that thing has kind of actually gone up, and I think it's kind of making people be like, okay, well, I'm just going to have to stick with what I have. We'll see if Microsoft changes that in the future, but I just wanted to point that out here because people were, I think, kind of unsure at first as to whether or not Sony was making the right call there. But 2 years in, it's safe to say they absolutely made the right call. And so at this point, I think that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all of the different aspects of the PlayStation 5 that I can think to talk about and kind of give a review on. And so that's it. That's where we are 2 years into the PlayStation 5's life cycle. I have to say, just to kind of summarize everything here, the PS5 has been a great console. It's been one of the best console experiences I've ever had. I think Sony has definitely done a great job, most importantly, making sure that there are a lot of different games to play. They're making sure that if you're somebody who is invested into the PS5, or if you're planning on investing into a PS5, you have a lot of content there at your disposal. And yeah, so that pretty much does it for this review, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. I hope you did find it informative. Again, if you did, make sure you leave this video a like. Be sure to leave all your thoughts down in the comments below. What has your experience with the PS5 been like thus far? I'll definitely be interested to see what you guys have to say. Subscribe if you're new, hit the bell notification icon, and feel free to share the video out on top of all that. But until next time, guys, take care.